welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by two guests who have been here separately to discuss their graphic novels and who are now here together to discuss a collaboration, which is so exciting to me. Two great tastes that taste great together. Such a great book, and I'm so excited. So, welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourselves and your book?
I'm Nicole Goux, and our book is called Pumpkinheads. It is about a group of kids who live in a flop house in LA and play punk music wearing pumpkin masks, hence the punk in heads pun.
I'm Dave Baker, and I'm the writer and co-creator of Pumpkinheads with Nicole.
So nice to have you both here together. Um, And so it's really nice to see that you are collaborating now. And from what I believe, it is not the first time. You have other stuff that you've done together before, and you have other stuff in the works. How did this collaboration originate?
Dave and I have been working together for a long time. So, like you said, we've done Fuck Off Squad and Everyone is Tulip and Forest Hills Bootleg Society. I know the name of my own book. Um, and, we've done a bunch of mini comics over the years. This one came about because I think we're always kind of trying to figure out what the next thing is. And we were on a road trip driving somewhere. I don't even remember where at this point. And the kind of pun of pumpkins popped into my head. And I had this idea of a punk band who plays wearing pumpkin masks. And I was like, this would be a very silly idea. It kind of lives in the world that we already like to write about. And Dave and I together then were able to like break it down and figure out how do we take this silly dumb idea and make it better and make it interesting and worth the time and effort that it takes to make a book this long.
Yeah, Nicole definitely had the idea of like the name and the basic idea of like it's a band and they wear these masks. And then I think, over the course of many conversations we built that out, and then I ended up kind of, I don't want to say, I don't remember actually if I was the one who came up with the characters. Did we come up with the characters together, or did I come up with them? I kind of don't remember. It's been so long.
I think it was probably a combo, but I would wager it was heavily you,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
generally I think I had kind of the idea of the band and this group of kids who all live together in a house, and we could talk about like the zine scene and their kind of social structures and probably some archetypes. But then you kind of went away and started like really figuring out, okay, this is Hannah, this is Jerry, this is Morgan, etc.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, I mean, because Nicole and I are both very heavily involved in the DIY zine comics community here in Los Angeles, and there's a big overlap between that community and the DIY music scene and the punk scene here in Los Angeles. Um, and so we kind of modeled, mushed the two together and modeled the characters on some people we know. Some of it's Nicole, some of it's me, some of it's our friends. Yeah, it's kind of a, coming of age romance comic, which is a lot of the things that we're both interested in. So it the like arc of the book follows a girl who drops out of art school after a really bad breakup, moves into this punk flop house and kind of starts kind of becoming involved in this like will they won't they relationship with a guy that she knew in high school, and then through a series of zany fucking adventures ends up as part of this like band. She ends up as the lead singer, and the book kind of deals with, as an artist trying to make a living in the city, everyone's always kind of like scrapping, trying to make money, trying to fulfill their passions, live this dream. And I think here in Los Angeles, there's a specific type of almost like Don Quixote-esque personality that is drawn to the city, myself included. Like I'm no Sancho Panza, you know what I'm saying? Um, and I'm a crazy person, just like the rest of these people sitting in coffee shops typing. So that kind of the mixture of all of that, the kind of like combustible romantic side of it, the dream of pursuing this creative endeavor, and then also this idea that like the idea that you set out trying to be an artist as a young person with a specific goal in mind, and then that goal becomes a moving target, and you end up becoming maybe interested in other things or following smaller, more intricate passions was something that we were both very interested in.
Mm. It made me think a lot about the art that you make in your, early 20s and how hard it is to sort of have a statement before you really know who you are, while you're still like deep in the process of kind of figuring out who you are, if you ever do. It's sort of like you're seeking that message while also like it's a lighthouse almost directing you, and it's messy and it's embarrassing sometimes along the way, just as your early 20s kind of are. It really evokes that period of your life very well too. And it made me like deeply nostalgic, like in a sort of sad way, even though like sometimes it is so, embarrassing and and messy. Yeah. So can
Hmm.
you talk about evoking that part of your life and how that's expressed in the members of the band?
Yeah, I think Nicole and I are both really big fans of this show called Sex Education. And in the final season of that show takes place at a school in England, and one of the characters leaves that school to, oh, that was a Lieutenant Commander Data that just fell over. One of the characters leaves that school and comes to a writing program at a university in America. And there's a scene where her writing professor, who's been this like cruel, kind of demonstrative, negative mentor, like an anti-mentor figure throughout the run of the season, she asks him point blank at one point, like, why are you so shitty? Like, why are you so cruel? And he says, well, it's so hard seeing all of you at the beginning. And I feel like that sentiment of the raw, unfulfilled potential of a creative journey when you're at the beginning of it, and also the confusion and the frustration of not having the skills or ability, um, is something that I think everyone can relate to, because it's not something that's just about being a creator. It's you as an individual building the building blocks of your own humanity, right? Divorcing yourself existentially from the lineage that you've found yourself in, because most people's familial structure defines so much of their early and teenage lives that once you get out on your own, then you have to ask yourself some really difficult questions, and hopefully some of that comes through in the book as well.
I also think, when you are so young and just figuring it out, you may have something to say, but you often don't have the skill to say it yet. And it as you age, it kind of flips where it's like, now I have the skills, but I've already said all of this, or I don't have the passion that it takes to continue this slog of, the difficulty of being a creative professional. It's not all just getting to play your music or make your art. There's all these other elements and aspects that come with it. And in the beginning, you're kind of not dealing with any of that because you're just like, I just have to figure out how to do this thing. And we can see through the book kind of where different characters are in the process. For example, one of our characters, Morgan, is kind of switching the kind of process of they are trying to figure out how to make the band successful and how to make the band big, but at kind of sacrificing their own skill and their own passion and their own kind of investment in the music itself. And then there's characters like Jerry who are just all about making the thing and making the music, and he's passionate, but he doesn't put any effort into figuring out actually how to make a career out of it or anything. He's just all flake and passion, and he's all over the place for the whole book, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also all of our books are autobiographical in some way, either existentially or sometimes literally. But I feel like Pumpkinheads, to a degree, is like maybe the most autobiographical, in that Nicole and I have made comics and books for quite a long time together. We know each other very well. We've been on the road together. We've seen each other in situations where, like, you're tired or you're walking with a limp because you've been standing for 6 hours or whatever the case may be. And so I think a lot of the frictions in the book that are there are various characters bumping off of one another are mined and extrapolated from real things. Like, I mean, obviously Nicole and I are on good terms. We're making books together, but you know what I mean. Like, you mine those little kernels of ideas into grandiose, more dramatic statements that you can hang these ideological dialogues on top of. Um, and I'm pretty excited by the way that some of that stuff came out, and not even just like story stuff like I am writing dialogue or whatever. I mean, like, I feel like some of those drawings that Nicole made of, independent zine fests or backyard punk shows or the kids loading gear in and out of Ubers or whatever, like those feel very experiential in their construction, in a way that can tell the person who's made it has lived it. I'm very impressed by that.
Those scenes at the zine fair did feel very familiar as somebody who, has tabled at like very small independent Comic Cons and things like that. That life that is like sort of, it really taps into how exhausting it is to sort of like also, you're like performing yourself in your art, but then you're also like selling yourself, which is like a different level of performance. So a slight turn in constructing Pumpkinhead, their sort of their history as a band, their body of work. The first part of the question is it as fun as it sounds to come up with like a whole bunch of album and song titles and stuff like that and sort of build their mythos that way? And B, how do you sort of like use those album songs, all that kind of stuff? Do you use that to sort of suggest their journey as a band, their arc as artists, their relationships?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think the fake biography stuff is it's kind of a mix of a couple different bands. Like it's partially cribbed from like early Misfits stuff, and then it's also almost pretty directly inspired by the hardcore band Turnstile. And so it's kind of a hybrid of those two things where like the multiple lead singers, like with the Misfits losing Glenn Danzig and then having Michael Graves, and then for I think for a small period of time didn't what's his face also Jerry Only? I think he also sang for a hot second. But whatever. Nobody pays any attention to anything that's not Danzig singing in the Misfits. But like, the idea that you would kind of go through these various figureheads. Oh, another band that I was thinking about when we were coming up with some of that stuff is the emo band Further Seems Forever, because their first record, Chris Carrabba of Dashboard Confessionals was the lead singer. The Moon Is Down. That record, I really liked that record. And then when he left to go do Dashboard, I was like, what? No. And then turns out he kind of made the right choice on that one. But like that band, Further Seems Forever, they kind of like they're this weird footnote in his meteoric rise now, where like he's never really returned to them. I think they've gone through two lead singers after him, and like that's always an interesting juncture to me when a band has such a distinct fingerprint due to the vocal stylings or lyrical proclivities of a front man or front woman, and then that person leaves, and the band, which is still the same band, like completely is rudderless. Like to me, like I'm a huge Rage Against the Machine fan, and Audio Slave, get it away. Boo. No, thank you. And I have nothing against Chris Cornell. Like, I think he seems like he was a very nice man. But that band, like, it was explicitly created because they were tired of dealing with Zach De La Rocha's perfectionism and desires to be artistic in their statement, not we just want to tour and make money, dude. Like we have bills to pay. And I think it's fine to be on either side of that conversation, but Bulls on Parade and, Killing in the Name of, I think are seminal, iconic pieces of work from that period. And it's not Like a Stone. So was any of that literally in the book? No, I don't think so. But I think that kind of milieu of when we were coming up with the characters and we were coming up with like this is a group of people that are kind of like Rage, where it's like there's a core group of musical talent that are very good, but they don't have the vision. And so these various lead singers that have cycled in and out of it have tried to put their fingerprints on it, but nothing's clicked to the degree that like, you need your figurehead who is also a visionary. You need your Gerard Way to be like, yes, I'm pretty and that's what people show up for, but also I have this, check out the big brain on Brad, right? I've got these things that I'm trying to say with my work that are not just, boy meets girl or whatever. And for our book, like the goal was what happens when you take this kind of like group of people who've been sort of trying to perfect this thing but haven't really been able to, and then you slot in somebody who seems like the worst possible version of a person to put in this scenario, but that tension is actually what births a new thing and like makes all of the gears click into place to a degree that wouldn't have happened without them. It was a very long, drawn out answer of me talking about like 2000s emo and hardcore stuff that whatever.
No, it was great. It was very, very comprehensive. And I'm really interested to hear all of those influences in terms of their, yeah, the history of the band. So, in terms of evoking the scene, the sort of, Southern California and the punk scene in LA, and that period of your life, your early 20s, can you talk about sort of like how the relationship stuff and the art stuff perhaps relate to each other? Because they both sort of seem like the kind of it's the kind of art and the kind of relationships that you can only hopefully, have in that period of your life.
Yeah, I mean, being in your early 20s, there is this kind of feeling of whatever I'm gonna do right now isn't gonna last because I'm 20 and, you know, whatever relationships that I make, like, could they last forever? Maybe, but I'm pretty young still, and so they're probably not going to. And I think, the same thing can happen with art where it's like, this is what I'm doing now. Actually, I think it's almost the opposite with art, actually, where you think this is what I'm passionate about, this is what I want, this is everything, this is my whole personality, and you don't actually realize that that can change as you grow. And for our main character Hannah, that moment comes kind of almost before the story really happens, where it's like she has this identity and her whole personality has been wrapped around this idea of becoming a painter. She's in art school, and then this person who, despite this idea of like, we don't know what's going to happen with these relationships, they feel so intense at that time period. So she's with this girl in art school, that girl dumps her, and her whole world crumbles. Not just her relationship, but also her identity and her place in art school. And she runs away. And then she kind of has to find what's the next thing while still having this kind of lingering identity of, oh, I'm a painter. And so she has to figure out, do I give up my previous identity? I'm doing this thing that's new and exciting and uncomfortable, but it's not really what I want for my life, right? And there's so much uncertainty there of which path do I take? Which direction do I take? Do I lean into the thing that is new and exciting, or is this just a blip in my story and exciting because it's new? Do I go back to my life and long-term goals of this, being a painter, which also feels like a very volatile situation because being a painter always is insecure. And so I think there's this kind of just high emotional stakes for
Yeah, I mean,
everything.
and I think we tried to use the interpersonal relationships and dynamics to ratchet up the pressure on those thematic statements, right? Because like I am very interested in the journey of an artist. I love documentaries about weirdo, reclusive people making their art. Most people don't. Most people, they want the human connection, they want the character, they want the drama of like the will they, won't they, or the how could you cheat on me, or whatever. And so us trying to marry those two themes together of like the volatility of the creative pursuit with the volatility of a maybe not so committed relationship or a dynamic that is maybe a little toxic, and how do you sort those two things out, and how does one ratchet up the pressure on the other? um one of the things we tried to do is also approach these heady themes very formalistically, and like how do we make a comic that is structured and uses the language of comics to milk these dramatic moments for as much as possible. So like one of the things we started doing when we were initially building the book was like we were looking at a bunch of like old romance comics, old Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen comics, Silver Age stuff specifically, because that's when the romance boom was really happening post the Wortham uh, trials and the Senate subcommittee trials that kind of censored most of comics out of existence for like 50 years. So we were looking at like a lot of those comics have this formalist mechanic where the first page is like either a splash page or a three-quarters splash page that's like a trailer for the story you're going to read. And the each issue has three stories in it. And so, like, you open up Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen or an issue of Young Romance or whatever, and there's a blonde girl, and she's like, George, how could you cheat on me? And then he's like, but I didn't mean to. And like that's the kind of like big hook image that pulls you through the rest of the story. So our books, each chapter in Pumpkinheads has this kind of trailer 1950s moment that opens every story that sometimes proves to be prophetic, sometimes proves to be something that we as artists are kind of like subverting your expectations with. And it's a means for us to kind of push and pull the reader for the exact thematic thing that you're talking about of like the human connection versus the career ambition and how those things wax and wane. The other thing that we were really excited about is like the second page of every issue is it's almost like a recap on a TV show, like a long running like Grey's Anatomy show or something, where there's six panels on the page and each panel is tied to one of six words. So the top three say that was then, and the bottom three say this is now. And that like idea of like giving somebody three snapshots into who this character or the storyline or whatever happened in the past was, and then setting up the immediate story you're about to get into with these three sustaining images that hopefully allows the reader to almost kind of like trick your brain into thinking that you've spent more time with these people than you have, so that we as authors can play on those heartstrings even more. So we're kind of like speed running all of the setup, and then every story is like permanent second act climax, like when everything is the worst it can possibly be. Like we're trying to push the characters to have as much drama and as much strife and interpersonal conflict as possible.
One of the places that comes from is that having enough space to really build an understanding of characters or an understanding of history can be really difficult in comics just because your real estate is small. In a prose novel, you have 100 words, hundreds of words on every page, and in comics, you have, 3 to 9 panels, which is there's just a lot less space and they take so much longer to make. So when you can short run that, you can give us a little bit more of an insight in a quick and easy way. I do think that that builds kind of the relationship of the readers to these characters and the intensity of any of the action that comes after.
Yeah, I think there's two modalities of making comics, right? There's the 1940s and 50s version where everything is hyper compressed and you're getting, a 2 year long Spider-Man story in 8 pages. Or there's hyper decompressed stuff, which is like basically post the year 2000, where every page has three panels on it and it's not a lot of time transpiring between each panel, right? And and I think both of those are very valid means of telling stories. And that's one of the things we were trying to do is like, okay, compress time as much as possible in certain areas and then expand time and decompress as much as possible in other areas so that you're both giving the reader the positive sensation of accomplishment while turning the pages of a book, but also having some of those pages be like months and some of those pages be minutes.
Yeah, the way that you use structure to suggest the relative movement of time, that's really fascinating. And I am so interested in how you also play with time in order to exploit time dilation almost in order to make the reader feel like they have spent a lot of time with these characters. I feel a lot of that is also done in the chyrons, which I really enjoy. It's sort of like, when Stan Lee is at his most like Greek chorus-esque, like, geez, like how are they gonna get out of this one? Or.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of the thing is we're trying to make a romance comic, right? So a lot of those like Simon and Kirby or Stan Lee and Ditko Spider-Man or any of those kind of like 60s era before it gets into the 70s, because the 70s is when you have Marv Wolfman and those guys do like laborious captions that are like literally telling you what you're about to see. So it's like, it's an issue of Tomb of Dracula and there's like Dracula on a, pedestal, or well, not a pedestal, an outcropping of a castle staring out, and the caption mechanic is like, Dracula stared out over the plains and was so brooding. And you're like, yeah, I know. I'm looking at the image. And then his thought balloon is like, my name is Dracula and I'm so brooding. And you're like, I know. I'm looking at the image. And then there's a
Hmm.
guy coming up behind him. He goes, Lord Dracula, I know you're brooding, but we have to go do stuff. And he's like, I'm hungry. Let's eat some people. And you're like, fuck. That could have just been one word balloon. So I think there's a push and a pull there, right? Like Steve Gerber, that guy was writing novels that were illustrated. And I love some of those because they're so weird. Like his Man Thing stuff or Howard the Duck is so great. But I think there's also like there's room to be malleable there, and pull from other sources. I think that's one of the things that's so great about like 70s manga is it has some of that stuff where it is dense and there are lots of panels, but also you're moving through the story quickly, like old issues of Kamen Rider or Cyborg 009 or whatever. Like, you know who the characters are, you know what's happening, and also we're gonna see them kick somebody. Like that's what we're here for. We're here to see the Kamen Rider kick some dudes.
I really appreciate one thing about juxtaposing the stuff about art and music and trying to make both a living and a statement as an artist with the relationship dynamics, all of which also being in this like very specific part of your life. Nicole, to your like earlier point about like not really knowing who you are or being afraid to take new steps because you are a little bit too tied maybe to who you thought you are and aren't ready to maybe move on to the next thing yet. I'd like to maybe ask about this is going to be like maybe a very awkwardly phrased question because it's sort of like half baked in my head. But it's really interesting to me the way that, like, the membership of the band is porous, almost like, like a cell with a porous membrane, like members come and go. Their crash pad where the band members live with like various other kind of people who come and go throughout time is also very like, yeah, transient and ambiguous. And all of the relationships across all of those spheres are also really, ambiguous because people don't know when they're dating or aren't willing to, like define things. It's all very messy and very scary and very vulnerable time of your life. How does that all relate to the color choices when you are working with a limited palette? What influences, what ideas shape like the choices of what your limited palette's going to be?
Yeah, I mean, initially this book was going to be a completely different palette. It was going to be still limited, but kind of more um, one static palette for the whole book of, it was going to be blue and green of these blue and orange, sorry, of these contrasting colors. And as we talked about the book and as we worked on the book, I ended up trying to make it more of this. So without giving too much away, there's a gradual progression of this band across the book, becoming more and more solidified as a team and as a unit, working together, getting, there are ups and downs, of course, but the projection is towards something more solid and something more specific to a very clear vision. And so, without being literally a rainbow, every chapter has a different color that leads us closer and closer to the orange of a pumpkin, essentially, which is kind of the final form of them as a band, as the Pumpkinheads. And so there is this sort of kind of arc and solidifying of their identities as, as Hannah maybe gets more invested in the band, as Jerry maybe starts to take things more seriously, as Morgan tries to, kind of rediscover the passion part of what they're doing, as Birdie realizes that she can do more than one thing at once, whatever these kind of arcs are, by the end of the book, they've, or actually Birdie's arc is a little different. I won't spoil things, but it is more about kind of self-actualization and getting closer and closer to that, the idea of the pumpkins as a unit.
I will say also that there is something really satisfying at the end of the book when there's a sequence where pe they're playing a gig and there's a character like looking up at the stage and kind of like nodding approvingly, like you guys did it. And that page being in orange, it feels, which is interesting because most of the stuff that's in the book thematically, we talked about it was built to pay off to that point, and that specific idea of like, oh, what if it was single color and it went to orange and orange is the final place. We found that pretty late in the book was all drawn and then Nicole had that idea and I was like, "Oh, that's a fucking great idea." And also, am I allowed to swear? I feel like I keep saying that by accident and
It's okay. My official policy is that I am a civil servant and shouldn't curse, but you are artists and should be allowed your full range of expression. So,
Great.
great. All right. Well, I'll try my best to not swear so much, but I'm not so great at that sometimes. Yeah, but we found that kind of late in the process, and that scene specifically where one of the characters is like observing approvingly, and that one being in orange. I remember being like, this scene would feel different if it was not in orange, and I'm glad that we arrived at this point, whether it be organically or directly.
once I said limited color palette, I realized I was like, well, it's not really what it is, but like, how do I even describe it? So, yeah, it was just really nice to see. The shift over time. I didn't even notice it for like the first two chapters. And then I was like, wait a minute. And, and it was like a really lovely experience. I love comics. I love anything that really encourages you to sort of like go back and reconsider parts that you've already read and look at like from a new angle as you continue forward. Yeah, just like a really lovely use of color that I really enjoyed. Related to that, and this is my last question, what is the collaboration between writing and drawing when it comes to the scenes of musical performance, where you have a lot of big splashes that don't necessarily have words on them, but are still very expressive? What does your collaboration look like in producing those pages?
It kind of depends on page to page. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know, Nick. They're playing it. Just do the thing. Lots of little panels. I don't know, whatever you want to do. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, we need to do X, Y, or Z because we have to pay off this thematic point, and we really need the composition to, whatever. The right side should be the circumference of somebody's head, and then the musical notes are like floating out of the back of their head, whatever. I don't know. I'm just making that up. But like, you know, most of the time, most of the time, I'm like, I don't know, Nick. Whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of them are like, and the pumpkins are playing music, and I do what I can with that. But there are pages where, all of the script, the lyrics are written out, and that so like there are times when I know that needs to be included and use that as kind of like a musical device in the way that things are drawn. Or there's a few pages where like, we're observing someone else in the crowd while the pumpkins are playing, and so the music panels are kind of more just like, hey, draw them playing, and then the kind of structure of some of the other stuff of like, we need to see this person ignoring them or being bored or whatever it is. There's more of kind of like a written version of that, but pretty, I think the reality is that we just talk about this stuff so much before Dave even writes anything that we just kind of know what it's supposed to be. So by the time we get to the point where there's a scene where they're playing music or something, I know what Dave's looking for or what we've decided is kind of the aesthetic of the thing.
Yeah, because the real answer is like the book itself is me trying to come up with the best portfolio piece for Nicole possible. It's me trying to be like, okay, what does Nicole want to draw? How is she going to have the most fun? And how can I build a framework to display her talents the best? And also smuggle in a couple sad teenagers kissing or whatever it is that I want to put in there. But it's mostly done in order to like build a platform for her to have a means by which to showcase her immense talents. And so when it comes to stuff like that, I know that she's going to be really good at, because we've been also doing this so long together. Like the second book we made, or maybe the third book we made, had a bunch of music stuff in it. And that stuff was more heavily scripted. But now it's like, Yeah, just do the thing from before. You remember the thing from years ago that we were that would yeah that could we just put some of that in here, but like maybe try and come up with something new, you know? So some of it is very formalist, like we were talking about with the six panels that was then, this is now. And I feel like those kind of like more concrete formalist things are usually my ideas of what I'm bringing to it. And then the like generalized formalist stuff where Nicole is breaking panel borders or coming up with an interesting means by which to showcase cell phones or, whatever the visual side of that is, that's usually in the script. It just says panel one and then the dialogue. And she's the one who's like, oh, what if we did panel one like this? And it was crazy or whatever. And most of the time I go, yeah, that's great. And occasionally, like once in a blue moon, I'm like, I think we need this to be a grid. Can we just have this one be a grid? But that's very rare. It's usually me going, that's such a better idea. Let's do that.
I do a lot of grids on my own.
You do a lot of grids on your own. You do. And it's important to have both, right? Because that's how you like
Mhm.
undergird the reader, right? Like I always say whenever we're talking about comics with people, like grids are Excalibur. Like grids are an easy means by which to communicate to a reader what is happening because they don't have to worry about processing any formalist thing. It's just top left, bottom right, top left, bottom right. And it's purely the composition inside the panel that matters. Because the thing that's interesting to me about comics is you're composing a page, you're composing a double page spread, and you're composing a panel all at once. So you're composing on three different levels, which is one of the reasons why a lot of, people from other mediums, I think they have a attraction to comics and they want to make comics, and then they try and they're like, oh, this looks really simple, but this is actually like 8 times the amount of work. Because I can't just think of the storyboard, quote unquote. I have to think of the storyboard and the panel shape of the board and the paper the board is on and the page turns that are happening at the same time. And I don't know, to me that's a very interesting and exciting problem to try and solve.
Well,
Just
and I
very
think the reason that the music stuff works and hopefully has an impact is that the kind of story stuff around it is tends to be simpler. There's exceptions to that, of course, but like most of Pumpkins is gridded. But when we get to the music stuff, then it's big and it's loud and there's no panel borders or we cross them, and so it makes it feel more emotional and have some more impact. And so it is that contrast that
Yeah,
gives you that feeling.
that's a very great way of putting it because sometimes, you read comics by younger cartoonists or just people who haven't made as many comics, and it's like every panel is a splash page, or every panel somebody's hand is coming out, or there's a border break, or like the balloons are crazy and all over the place. And it's like, I understand guitar solos are cool, but you need a backbeat, you need a chorus, you need a bridge, you need a verse, you know. You don't you Not everything can be a guitar solo all the time.
great point. And I think it's, really interesting how this relates to bringing things full circle when we were talking about like time in comics. When you're reading six panel pages or traditionally structured ones, you're kind of flipping at a pretty steady rate for a while. But then the musical splash pages sort of like you stop flipping for a little while and your eye doesn't follow that normal, pattern down the page. You sort of wander all over, and you as the artist get to kind of manipulate a little bit where their eye goes with what you're doing. It's really lovely, I think. And it evokes also like maybe like how you feel when you're listening to music that you love when time does sort of stop and you feel like you're kind of like, this is such an early 20s thing to say, but like when you feel like time stops at a concert and you're just like, you reach that
Yeah.
like effervescence with the people around you, like, yeah, it
Mhm.
really captures that very well.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
there's a very like transportive power that music has that comics does not. Which is
Yeah.
probably part of the reason why we end up making comics about musicians so much, because there's this kind of like desire to crack that narrative nut, to be like, I know that they tell us we can't do this here, but like, what if we did? And
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
I don't know, that's very interesting to me. Like, there was that Johnny Cash biographical graphic novel that came out a couple years ago, where like all of the music was done like in his shadow, where he'd be like walking down a road, and like the shadow would be behind him, and there'd be like crows flying out of the shadow or whatever, with the lyrics of like, I can't think of any Johnny Cash songs right now, but like a Johnny Cash song that we would all know. Folsom City Blues, is that one? I don't know. And like, but that's interesting, right? Because comics is so often a concrete reality as it's depicted, but it's really not. It can be an elastic reality. It can be bizarre and asymmetrical and impressionistic in a way that other mediums can't. Like you have to spend millions of dollars to have crows fly out of a shadow in a movie. But in a comics page, it's the same line that's defining Johnny Cash's wizened visage as is the weird metaphorical crows coming out, and that inherently draws those two together and makes correlations in the mind of the reader. And that's interesting to me. I don't know that we've ever succeeded, but you know what? We're probably gonna look for our next book, 2029, more music stuff. We're gonna keep trying.
That underlines something that I think I read this somewhere and I cannot remember where it was, but that, comics is a medium, but it's also like a language that you learn, that you
Mhm.
sort of become more fluent in as you make more of them, which is why sometimes, people's first comics like can feel like, oh, like this is me in my eighth grade Spanish class when I know like, I don't know any of the irregular verbs yet or, so
Yeah, Yo quiero Taco Bell.
yeah.
We're working only in the present tense.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, I like cats. Um,
Yes.
Mhm.
yeah, so yeah, it's just such a really lovely like marriage of your interests and your styles, and it's a really like as somebody who is like into my early 40s now, like a really lovely evocation of a period of my life that, we tend to view with like sort of ambivalent ambivalent feelings. So I know that you have, several things in the work because you've worked so much together before and you will continue to. But what are some of the things on your horizon right now?
So I have Pumpkins coming out on April 27th. On that same day,
April 7th, April
April
7th.
7th, sorry. April
Mm.
7th, sorry, not 27th. April 7th. On that same day, I also wrote and drew an issue of The Twilight Zone that will be coming out. It is the first issue of the new arc over at IDW, and so that's a pretty exciting one.
What's it about, Nick?
It is called Growth. It is about a severely depressed woman who gets a surprise in a called subscription like food box of a root that takes on some new life. I don't want to spoil too much. I haven't talked about this one yet, really. So I'm like, wait, how do I talk about it? It's got your classic Twilight Zone twist. But I did actually I really enjoyed there's a lot of freedom in the Twilight Zone series because obviously there's no main characters, there's no one thing that you can do. And I pitched a couple of stories and some of them were a little bit more standard Twilight Zone, and I felt like this one was a little more personal and I was pretty pleasantly surprised that they picked it. And so I'm very excited for that one coming out.
And you're writing and drawing it?
Writing and drawing it,
Oh
yes,
my
correct.
gosh. Are you lettering it as well?
I am lettering it
Oh
and
my
coloring
gosh. I
and
gotta run out to a comic book store
doing
near me.
everything.
Wow,
Hmm.
you wrote wow.
Thank
And is
you,
it
Dave.
is it
That's
in is it
great.
in black
Yep,
and white just like the show?
it is.
Oh my
Hey, Dave, what do
gosh.
you have going on?
Oh my gosh, thanks so much for asking, Nikki G. I have a collection of my Halloween Boy comics that I've been making for the past couple years here. It's getting published by Oni, May 27th. Issues 1 through 5 of the first arc, Last of the Halloween Boys. It's an action adventure horror comic that follows a character who thinks of himself as the patron saint of the impossible. For fans of things like Hellboy, Indiana Jones, and Universal Monsters, this might be of interest.
Well, I look forward to all of these things. They all sound very exciting and right up my alley. It was so nice to get to talk to both of you together and to, having already interviewed you separately, it was such a nice opportunity to kind of see like what you bring to each other's work. And yeah, it was really lovely. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I'm not gonna lie, doing interviews by myself for books, it's fine, but it's more fun when Nick's there because then we can bounce off each other and talk about. And also, to be frank. 9 times out of 10, I don't remember the things that have happened the correct way. And she can be like, actually, that's not how that happened. And that's good. So there's not false information put out into the universe.
You're the one who corrected my incorrect date.
Yes, that's true because that one I do know because all of the interviews we've done, they're like
Yes.
bookstore, April 7, comic shops, April 8.
Well, thank you again. And thank you, listeners, for joining us. By the time that you hear this, Pumpkinheads will be out in the world. So please check it out. Yeah, thank you again. It is time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.